Hi everybody, shall we kick off? Great. Well, thank you so much for coming here today. I know it's been a long day for many of you. It's lovely to still see a packed room. We're really so honored to have our wonderful panel, and I'll introduce them shortly. I've been asked to give a little bit of a retrospective into iProbono. So my name is Shireen Irani. I'm founder of iProbono and a trustee. And I started the organization in 2009 with always the intention to come to India. Very luckily, in 2010, I was introduced to Swati Sukumar, an advocate in Delhi. And even though we didn't meet for a year, we became soul sisters, I'd say. We ended up coming up with this plan to launch the iProbono model in India. And Swati was the linchpin for that because she was embedded in the Delhi legal community. So when we finally met up, we then were running around the city, meeting up with organizations and lawyers, finding out, is there an appetite for this? Will people support us? And I think a lot of people thought, these are two young do-gooders, two girls. And it was quite easy to undermine that, We had a lot of comments about, is it necessary? There is Human Rights Law Network, or you're not going to get lawyers to be able to do this. So something I've always prided us in is that we're very tenacious, we don't let go. So we continued having conversations. And then we got lucky. We happened to meet some advocates who really supported our work and who said that this is necessary. There is a gap here to fill. And our central premise is there are so many issues that need to be addressed. Can a relatively small group of human rights lawyers address all of them? Is it possible for mainstream lawyers to give their time, small amount of their time, with training, with backup, with facilitation? Can they do something meaningful? A number of advocates agreed. Oh, and there's Swati Sukumar right there. And Swati and I had the pleasure in the early days of speaking with Prashant Bhushan, Meenakshi Arora, and they all said yes, and they very generously opened up their contact books. And one of the funniest ones was when we went to meet Mr. Venugopal, and me and Swati were sitting there, and he was on time, serving us tea, telling us how this was necessary, and then asked his clerks, say, bring in the directories, photocopy them. And by the end of the meeting, he'd given us a stack of advocates, contact details, like, the yellow pages, he'd given that to us and said, contact all of these advocates, tell them I've said that they must get involved with you. And we said, yes, yes. But I don't know if we ever actually did that. But again, it was that forthcomingness, of people like Ms. Venugopal and Indira Jay Singh and others who made us realize that actually we were onto something and that we would get a warm response. So in the early days, we were looking to do what I call the low-hanging fruit. We were looking to work with NGOs that needed legal support and couldn't easily get it on really, the meat and potatoes of their work, their employment handbooks, governance advice, contractual advice. I always felt it was somewhat peripheral. I thought it was important that, of course, that we support strengthening the civil society ecosystem, but it felt peripheral. And I'll be honest that I didn't think we could do anything more at that stage. I didn't think that our lawyers had the appetite for more, and I didn't actually think that it was possible to do anything more instrumental at that particular point in time. And then in 2014 was a really seminal point for us. In 2014, I was in town and we organized a seminar for organizations working in children's rights. And there were organizations like Teach for India, Mumbai Mobile Crashes, Salam, Balak Trust, and there was also HUC, Child Rights Center, who we had not done much work with at all. HUC was there, and many of you know that they are the prominent organization working in child protection. And they came up to Swati, Meenakshi Ganguly, and Bharati Ari, and they said, we have a problem. There's a little girl who's been terrible injustice. Can you do something? Swati said, Shireen, what do you think? And I was like, well, yeah, we should try. And we were very lucky that that case was so successful. Many of you know the Aman case, and it set a precedent for how children should be treated in the court. And that, I suppose, was gave us great courage, and that's, I suppose, what's kept me going. I had the wonderful support of people like Swati working with me. I was with my law firm, and I had their support, which was very important to me personally. I was reckless, and I thought that outsized opinion of what I was capable of. And all of that, I suppose, contributed. And then we get this great case where we achieve a lot. But at the end of that case, our client, the little girl, her mother, when we told her that we'd gotten this fantastic outcome, she shrugged her shoulders. Because ultimately, what was justice after all these years, after all this suffering, still living in destitution? Where was justice? And that's when we realized that actually we had a larger role to play, and we knew that there was something we could tap into. So at that point, Swati said, let's create a panel of lawyers. And that's when we started getting more heavily into litigation, and we brought together this wonderful advocate community. So I got us some funding at the time, and as we were building up the organization, I was actually asked, in 10 years, where do you see yourselves? And I was looking at that note that I wrote 10 years ago, and I said something to the effect of, I think we're going to be a force to be reckoned with. I think we'll have 500 plus advocates to call upon. I think civil society organizations that need support will know who to come to, us. And I believe that we'll be able to make some pretty seismic changes. But I also said that I think for the first 10 years, we are going to be doing easier stuff, because a lot of what needs to be done is low-hanging fruit. We were pushing on open doors often. And I said that following 10 years, the point at which we are now, is going to be tougher. So it's wonderful that we do have this incredible community that we can now call upon for our next 10 years. And I'll be going a little bit into that and our plans for the future, and to think about how all of you can contribute to that story. So that was a little bit of information on iProbono, and now I'm going to move on to the star event. So we have with us Justice Martin Lepur, who needs no introduction. As many of you know, his bench was called the Social Justice Bench, and I can't think of a better compliment for any judge. In the Supreme Court over 6 years, he gave several seminal judgments and changed the landscape, I think, for many lawyers and inspired many lawyers. After we hear from Justice Lepur, we're going to be hearing from Vikram Seth. As many of you know, we have launched the Justice Leela Seth Fellowship Program. Vikram and his sister Radhana and their brother Shantam, they are the co-chairs of the fellowship. And he'll be speaking a little bit about what we've been doing, what we hope to do with the fellowship in the spirit of Justice Leela Seth. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Justice Lepur.
Thank you, Shireen. That was a wonderful introduction actually about the work that iProbono is doing. I've been hearing about it for a long time, and I'm glad that I was able to come for today's event. Let me begin by giving an incident which perhaps might interest Vikram and Aradhana. About the first time I went to Tihar jail, it was with Justice Leela Seth as a part of the Justice Leela Seth Commission of Inquiry on the death of Rajan Vijay. I was assisting her as a lawyer, as the counsel for the commission. And one of the terms of reference was what can be done about improving the condition in Tihar jail. So I went with her, and we spent a considerable amount of time in Tihar jail. And at the end of it, she asked me, she said, what should I write? The reason why she asked was that the conditions were horrible. They were really horrible. And that has actually stuck in my mind. That if somebody goes to Tihar jail, or goes to any jail for that matter, there's a big problem as far as that person is concerned. Anyway, she gave her report. I don't know to what extent it has been implemented. But that was my first introduction to jail. Several years later, when I was a judge in the Delhi High Court, uh, an application was moved by Haq through Inakshi Ganguly to say that two boys, brothers in Lajpat Nagar, they were arrested by the police and were going to be sent to Tihar jail. So the application was in the nature of a public interest litigation, and requested me to do something about it. So I issued notice to Delhi police to find out what had happened, and it transpired during the hearing. Two things transpired. One is that they were both shown to be 19 years of age, right? So if you're below 18, you go into an observation. But if you're above 18, you go into Tihar jail. And so the police wanted to send them to jail, so they said, they're 19 years old, 19 and 20, and sent them to Tihar jail. The other thing that happened was that on an earlier occasion they had been detained because of some theft. And under the Juvenile Justice Act, the police is not supposed to keep a record of the crimes, the alleged crimes being committed by juveniles. But the police did have a record, right? So there was a theft in Lajpat Nagar. On the first occasion, I don't know whether they were involved or not, but they were detained. And because they were detained and because there was a record, the police didn't want to investigate. They just picked up these two kids and said, all right, you go in. So these two instances, I felt that children are not being looked after at all, and they have no rights. And even if they have some rights, nobody knows what those rights are. And you send them to Tihar jail, and it's going to destroy their life. There was another incident that occurred, and again, it was taken up as a public interest litigation. What had happened was that there were two girls who were picked up from a brothel in Delhi. And at that point of time, the police used to think that girls in a brothel are also criminals. Right? It took us a long time to tell them that no, they're not criminals; they're actually victims of crime. But anyway, they were taken to the court, and one person came up and he said, she's my daughter, and I want to take her back with me to Calcutta. So the judge passed an order saying that the father is here and I'm giving custody of this girl to the father. Now, this girl wanted to say something, right? But the only language that she knew was Bengali. And she was saying something which nobody understood. Again, Inakshi was there by chance, and Inakshi knew Bengali. So she asked her what has happened. And this girl told her that she was picked up from a brothel. She was trafficked actually. And the person who claims to be her father was actually the trafficker. He had paid the parents some amount of money, whatever it is. And he was going to take her on the ground that he's the father, and then, send her back into some other brothel. So Inakshi, sent me an email and said that this is what has happened. And I got that email and I spoke to my Chief Justice at that time, and I told him, I said, listen, this is something which, normally a public interest litigation used to be through a petition that is filed in the court or through, a letter petition. But this was through an email. So I told the Chief Justice, I said, listen, let's not get into technicalities. This is what has happened. It's going to affect the life of this girl. And let's take it up as a public interest litigation. What also happened was that while the custody of this girl was given to the trafficker, her colleague some other person came up, also a trafficker, and said that, I'm the father of this other girl, so give me custody of the other girl. But I think the court timing was over, or something or the other happened, and the order was not passed. So there were actually two girls involved. One whose custody had been given to the trafficker, and the other whose custody would have been given the next day. So the Chief Justice agreed to take it up as public interest litigation, and orders were passed, not to give custody, and to verify that whether these persons are actually the father of these two girls. So again, they don't have a voice, okay? And if they do have a voice, who is there to understand them, right? You would have these two girls were from Calcutta. It was just, a coincidence that somebody who was Bengali speaking was there. But then you could have cases from several other places. Victims of crime are, actually treated as dirt, virtually. There was an incident, again, that was brought to my notice, where a young girl, she must have been about 7 or something, her father was a daily wager, okay? So she had been raped, 7-year-old girl, and she came to the court 7 times with her father for her statement to be recorded by the magistrate. 7 times the statement could not be recorded for one reason or another. The magistrate was on leave or something or the other had happened. Which meant 2 things. One is this girl would have to relive the trauma of what she went through 7 times. Her father was a daily wager, so he would lose 7 days' wages, right? And nothing would happen at the end of the day. Again, an email was sent to me, and I requested the Chief Justice to take it up as public interest litigation, and directions were issued the next day before the case could be taken up in the trial court, and a direction given by the bench that you please take up this case and make sure that her statement is recorded. Now, fine, that was taken care of, but the girl was small, 7 years old. The magistrate was sitting on this high table, so to speak, and wanted to see this girl, but he couldn't. Okay, so he asked her to stand up on a chair. So this girl was standing on a chair or a low table or something, so that they could be looking at each other, eye contact. And the fact that she was standing over there, the door was open, like all court rooms, doors are open. Lawyers were going up and down, and some of them were wondering, why is this girl standing on a chair? So they came in to find out what has happened. Now, you can imagine, there's this girl who's supposed to tell the judge what actually happened, how she was raped, or when she was raped, and where she was raped, and so on, give all those details. And you had this crowd of onlookers, lawyers who are trying to figure out what's happening. So these are the kind of problems that children have been facing over the years. I'm not talking about my first visit to the RJ, that was in the 1990s, sometime 1995. But I'm talking about a period which starts from that time and continues till today. Okay, children have no voice. How do you, defend it? You have instances. I was talking to experts from Netherlands in Bangalore. We had this case when I was in the Supreme Court. It was a horrible case where 34 girls were systematically raped, sexually abused over a period of time. The home in which they were living had no windows. Okay, it was owned by a person whose wife was a minister in the cabinet in Patna, and We came to know later on that the neighbors would hear screams in the middle of the night, in the middle of the day, but they were scared of making a complaint because the person's wife was a minister. And when this thing somehow or the other came out, through some kind of an inspection that was carried out by Tata Institute of Social Sciences, that's when the whole thing came into the open. And then what happened? The minister was absconding. I mean, can you believe it? The police said we can't trace her. For about a week, they said we can't trace her. I said, how is that possible? But anyway, she was detained, and the conviction, the case started. It was transferred to Delhi so that it can be expedited. Now, these people from NIMHANS told me that one of the problems that they had, again, of communication. How does a 7-year-old girl, in some cases, how does a 5-year-old girl explain what has happened? Right? They can speak the language, they can speak Hindi, the judge can speak Hindi, but how do they explain what has happened? Would that be evidence? If you have a support person to assist these girls in telling their story, the allegation is, they're being tutored. Right? So, what do you do? So, the point that I want to make is that, first of all, many of the children, many of them, don't know what their rights are. Even if they know what their rights are, they're unable to express themselves in a language that we as adults can understand. Third, they are up against a system, which is very difficult to tackle, and that system is run by the police, it is run by the courts. The courts go on the basis of evidence, right? Now, we've not been able to get over that problem. You may have very good lawyers representing them. Maybe they're able to explain to the judges, maybe they're able to explain to the Juvenile Justice Board that, listen, this is how the case should be dealt with compassion, with empathy, because you're dealing with victims of crime. Even children who are in conflict with law are children who need care and protection. No child is born a criminal, right? They become, or they are said to have committed a crime, alleged to have committed a crime, only because of circumstances, right? Maybe something has happened in school, maybe something has happened on the playground, in the park. Maybe, there's domestic violence, right? Maybe the father is unemployed and doesn't know what to do. Where is the next meal going to come from? So, children, whether they are victims of crime or they are persons who are alleged to have committed a crime, do not know their rights. And I think it is our duty, and even if they know their rights, like I said, they are voiceless. I think it is our obligation as members of society to educate children, to educate society, that it's nice for us to talk about children being the future of the country, right? But what is the future of these children? And if these children don't have a future, what is the future of the country? Okay, and like I said, I'm talking about from a period from 1990s till now. So many of these children, including that 7-year-old girl who is standing on a chair, are now adults. What is this going to be their contribution to society? What is the future of the country if you look at these people as the future of the country? We need to think about that. And so I would urge all of you to contribute whatever you can, in whatever way you can, to educate society, adults like us, about the rights of children so that they can lead a better existence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justice Lukur, and we will have opportunities to ask questions later on. I want to move on now to Vikram. Vikram, yes?
Yeah.
Great.
I'm sorry I've been wearing this thing because I have well for some reason. I'm sure I'm getting better, but I think I've probably passed the point of infection. But since the risk has to be taken by the people most proximate to me, I thought it better to wear a mask for the most part. If I slink away afterwards, please forgive me. I'd like to ask Radha, my sister who's sitting in front, to take it so that I can hear the discussion that goes on afterwards. Possible. Do you think you'll be able to do that? Thanks. So, I'll start with an interesting sentence. Many years ago, I'm reading it, many years ago, perhaps even before your grandparents were born, India was a very different country to live in. The people of India could not always talk to whomever they wanted, or work wherever they wanted, or even decide what the rules to run the country should be. I'll start with this sentence because my mother wrote it in a book called For the Children of India, an introduction to the Constitution by way of the few words of the preamble. And since much of the discussion today has been about children and of course housing as well, I thought that I'd point out that my mother did quite a lot of interesting work with children. After she retired, for a few months she felt, oh God, wonderful, I can just do whatever I like. And then after about 8 months, she fell into a kind of, depression really. And she didn't know what to do with herself. And she decided after a while that the only way of dealing with this was through activity. And actually I can say both my father and my mother are Karma yogis and Karma yogis. She decided that the 3 areas she would concentrate on were women's issues, children's issues, and the environment. So at the age of 64 or something, 63, she started sitting with 20 and 21-year-olds in classes in the World Wildlife Fund, not a million miles from here, and waxed rapturously about olive ridley turtles and other things outside my ken. But had to keep doing something. Later, she did arbitration and so on, and as Justice Lukur, one of our most admired judges, said, she was one of the first people to visit the Harji. She wanted, after all, if you're sentencing people to prison as a judge, it behooves you to see what it is you're sentencing them to. You can't avoid your responsibilities, but you have to have some sort of cognizance of the situation. And when she was asked to have a one-person commission on the death in Tihar jail of Rajan Pillai, the industrialist, the cashew king of India or Singapore.
Biscuit bag.
No, not cashew. Okay. I'm very glad. You must keep doing this. Okay? Quite often when I'm talking about my books, people will say, no, you don't mean Sudha, you mean Veena. And I say, yes, that was an earlier draft, you're quite right. So anyway, to revert to what I was saying, she said, I'll take it on one condition. And that is that I will not restrict myself to finding the causes, the proximate causes, the specific causes of the death of Rajan Pillai. I take it on if I can make recommendations about reforms in Tihar jail and perhaps by extension elsewhere. Her remit was limited in a sense, but certainly she wanted it. And she wrote a report, and I remember looking in reference to what Justice Lukur said, at these files in which action taken reports took place. She made God knows how many. You know this better than I do, being the advocate of the commission. Things had to. She checked to see these. Now, of course, it's an Augean stables. Obviously, you can't improve things very much, but within the limits of what she could do, and with the pressure that she could bring to bear, she did what she could. Later, she was a member of the Law Commission, and then she was a member of the Justice Burma Committee, the three-person committee, which brought out a report within a month or so of being asked to deal with this terrible, terrible death of Nirmal. I remember a discussion at lunch that day with her before she got the report. She said, "You know what's going to happen about this? They're going to just get a few Bantu lawyers and judges to form a commission, and then they'll sit on it for a bit. And then they'll forget about it." An hour later, she got a call as a Bantu judge, ex-judge. And she had to be somewhat pressured to take it on. And I think it was because, what's the name of that lawyer? Gopal, an incredibly practical man who, the government, even to get a pencil requires God knows how many requisition sheets. He said, all the facilities of my office are going to be yours. Just assume that there's going to be no problem with it. It was hard enough anyway to get all these interviews, all these things, which included that of, since the remit had been wide of women who had been raped or molested in Kashmir, in Assam, under the Army Special Forces Act and other acts, with very little justice to show for it. And this arbitrary exercise. Anyway, so she did consent to sit on it, and I'm quite glad she did. Justice Verma sadly died just a few months later. I think this took a terrible toll, but being a judge of great scrupulousness and probity, and also, of course, a Karmyogi, they all worked themselves. Papa, my father, about whom more later, said that she was not going to sit on any other commission. He was going to put his foot down. He was going to try to put his foot down. Mama had her own way of dealing with things. My mother told us stories when we were younger, sharing insightful truths, you might call them, about justice, about courage, compassion, curiosity, about rigor, logic, and hard work. I believe these are some of the things that you've been discussing or been thinking about today. I'm very happy to join the celebration of 10 years of iProbono in India as a co-chair of Justice Leela Seth Fellowship. I was told, so about the JLSF earlier. I said, what the heck is the JLSF? But that has been added to the alphabet soup, which IIHC, the JFA, yes, and so on. This is, yeah. And my brother Shant. Shant could be here. You spent the day in workshops about promoting child rights, protecting housing rights, how to establish your careers as lawyers, and many other inspiring issues. You may also have met Gauri and Shalanki and Krishna, the growing family of Justice Leela Seth Fellows, or JLSFs. Now, I thought the best way of talking about my mother was to use her own words, because in a sense you can then understand her charm and her integrity. As a young student, in England, she took up law because there was nothing else she could do. My father was working. She couldn't attend nursing school or medic or anything. I was at home, she had to mind the kid. I was 3 or 4 at the time. Law was the only thing where you could, in those days, I don't know how it is now, go to the Inns of Court and imbibe wisdom from your betters. So the lectures didn't require attendance, strictly speaking, but the dinners did. Oh, Shantam! Hi, I just mentioned that you were not here.
I just arrived in Delhi right now.
It's like rubbing that lamp, and suddenly the genie appears. I don't know.
Oh, great. Okay. No, that's it.
The 3 co-chairs are all in attendance. So, when Shanta was born, he doesn't have any acute memory of this. When Shanta was born, it was April of 57. And the exams were 3 or 4 months later. And my mother didn't know how to study them. I mean, it was very, very difficult. During the Inns of Court thing, my father would come home, and then my mother would go off. Good. Shantam, she was a problem, right from the beginning. But on the other hand, he may have been an inspiration because she came first in the bar in the whole of India. Men, women, English, Indians alike. 3 months or 4 months after having given birth to him. And she was very nervous. She was quite certain that she had not done well. But my father, who was remarkable in his own right, and I think it is very necessary. Well, I wouldn't say it's necessary. I'll say it helps a great deal if you're a married woman to have a supporting husband, particularly in India, given the way we think about this. And secondly, the enfranchisement of a gender may partly be based on the disenfranchisement of a class. We have servants. Now, I don't know what my father's attitude might have been, even an enlightened man like he, if there was no food at home when he came back, if my mother was in chambers or something like that. So it's worth considering that. Shanta, what does that say?
You're saying that I was an inspiration.
Oh, yes. That's the part he remembers. Premo, that's my father, pampered me and kept a hot meal ready for me when I returned home each day after doing the exams. The first evening, he made grilled trout garnished with olives. He then served me strawberries and cream to cheer me up. They used to normally, because they were quite poor, they'd have sausages and toast or something. The bar final results were due to be published at midnight on the 27th of October 1957. That morning, Premo and I drove to Northampton with Shantam in a carry cot in the back seat to say goodbye to some of Premo's old college friends. He was in the Northampton College of Technology, studying leather and footwear technology. My father was a mochi, and my father was a dean. And teachers also, as we were due to go back to India in a few days. I didn't know what would happen if I didn't get through the exams, as Premo's assignment in England was over, etc. Anyway, that evening we drove straight from Northampton to the Times building, which is where these results were published. Arriving there just after midnight. Though I had been tense the whole day, Premo, the perpetual optimist, told me that I had nothing to fear. On the way, with a view to celebration, he bought a large bottle of whiskey and a small bottle of sherry from a pub. Pubs don't normally allow you to buy a bottle. So he said, well, how much is it per peg? And then he said, look, I'll buy it on the basis of pegs, so you may as well give it to me. So that's what he did. As the shops had closed, but there were no glasses to drink from. And Premo had to persuade the landlord. Actually, he would have been a very good lawyer. He said, what if I smash this glass? How much would you charge me? He said, okay, I'm smashing it. He put it in his pocket. And he got 2 glasses. As we neared the Times office, a young man suddenly jumped onto the bonnet of our car. I recognized him as a student named I. Qazi, who had failed his bar final exams numerous times. We didn't know what he was trying to do. With suicide, he was gesticulating and shouting, stop, stop! We thought he wanted us to stop our car, which we did. Qazi, generous soul, was deliriously happy that I had come first, despite the fact that he had failed his exams on spot. I wouldn't believe him, and so we drove on to the Times office where I saw the newspaper, my own name printed in black and white at the top of the list. Saint, comma, Mrs. Leela, ... Lincoln's Inn. I was amazed and suddenly very hungry. Kramer said he had often thought that I might come first, though I myself had not been at all sure of even getting through. He wanted to celebrate immediately. This was difficult, as it was long past midnight and we had baby Shantam in the car with us. But Qazi, who lived nearby, said he would look after the baby while we went to a restaurant. On the way to the... we sat in the car and had a few drinks together and then went to eat. When we went to Qazi's place to collect our baby boy, we were told that he had got up once and cried a bit, which had alerted the landlady who came up to Qazi's room to find out what her baby was doing there. Though she didn't believe Qazi's story, she had to soothe the baby back to sleep. So that would be a story of her as a young student. As a barrister, she couldn't get into anyone's chamber at the word baby. We have what's his or her name?
Azad.
Huh?
Azad.
Azad.
She needs to be.
Obviously taking for freedom. As far as practicing is concerned in Calcutta, there were two famous solicitors or lawyers actually. No. One was an Englishwoman, and she thought that a lot, and the other was Sachin Chaudhary, a distinguished lawyer who later became finance minister. And I'm afraid some of you have heard the story before, but I can't resist telling it. He said, "I'm sorry, young lady, it took her a month to get an interview with him, but I really think what you should do is get married. That is what your job in life is." So she said, I am married. He said, "Well, then go and have a chat." He said, "I have a chat." Because it is very selfish to only have one child. Have another. I don't know how he gave such peremptory dictates. But anyway, she said, "I have 2 children." So he thought for about a minute. He said, "You're a determined woman, you'll do well in the law, come back on Monday." It was quite difficult for her. When my father was transferred to Patna, she had to follow him. Most of the time, Patna, Calcutta, she followed him. The last one to Delhi was when he followed her, which was an interesting story, but not to be told. Read this book. It really is quite a wonderful book, on balance. Dedicated to her grandchildren. She tripped on a wire while listening to R.K. Narayan talk about something. No, it was not Narayan, it was Lakshman. It was this part. And as a result, she was laid up in bed and didn't know what to do, so she wrote this book. It's like all the great books that were written in prison, Nehru, and unfortunately Hitler, and others. So, she was in Calcutta. She built up a reputation not just as in matrimonial and criminal law, but also in constitutional law, tax law, and so on. Hardly, she came to Delhi, settled here, and then she became a judge, the first woman judge of the Delhi High Court. Her colleagues requested her to make coffee for them, and she politely declined. In Delhi, if you become a judge, you automatically get into the IIC. No, sorry, what am I saying? Gymkhana. endless lines. Queues lasting years. Good comment. And Shantam and I, being feminists, said, Mama, you must insist on changing the rule. Women have to be allowed in their own right to enter the Gymkhana club. I know there are women, widows, and women out of town, more women than men. The committee did something rather sly. They put my father's name at the top of the list. Shantanu and I were both shocked. We said, "No, this is not acceptable. You've got to make a fuss." Mama said, thanks. Mama said, darling, it's not worth fighting every battle. This is something that struck me, and this is something that people from all walks of life have to take or to understand. That is, you can't tilt at every wind. In one regard, we were successful. There have been no misjustices. Shantanu said, and I said, you want to be Miss Justice, Peter. What is this Mrs. Justice? They might think of the wife of Justice also. She said, no, darling, yes, what is this Miss Justice? Sounds like injustice. She said, then our argument appealed to her sense of not trying to be conspicuous. We said, Mama, just consider the line, Mr. Justice or Mr. Justice, and then Mrs. Justice juts out 3 letters and goes down. You'll be very conspicuous. If you just reduce it by 1 letter, it's a straight column, no one will notice you. You can do your good, you can, but I mean, we found that. The story of bats in her hair in the bathroom in Patna, where only 2 women lawyers were there were no bathrooms for it. She was scared of certain things. Mice, bats. She was not scared of the Chief Justice, who, there was a Chief Justice, the detailed story is here. At the end of this event where he yelled at her when she was the acting Chief Justice of the Delhi High Court, there's a conversation. He said, why should there be even one who doesn't sit? I know there are a number. I know that you sit the whole day. Send me their names immediately. I will transfer them. How dare they not work sitting in Delhi while judges of the Supreme Court are slogging from morning to evening? Send me their names at once. I have written to you. I will transfer them. Etc. No. Send me their names. I will transfer them. I was very upset. I was taken aback and totally nonplussed by this behavior. I wondered if he spoke to other Chief Justices like this, or was it only with him and he thought he could bully me? Or was it because I was just an acting Chief Justice? Well, I wasn't going to be browbeaten, but I was certainly upset. Then a little more inappropriate action by him, and she wrote a letter describing the workload of various judges. At the end, she wrote the final paragraph. I am not used to being shouted at or spoken to in an offensive tone. Nor am I used to being spoken to in a manner that implies subservience on my part. Nor do I appreciate the intemperate tenor with which you spoke about the judges of the Delhi High Court. I would like to register my protest. I expect both to give and to receive a modicum of courtesy. With regards, sincere. Later, when she became Chief Justice of the Shimla High Court, it was difficult. There's a lot of a woman judge in something like Shimla, where there's quite a lot of chauvinism and families, and there was a judge who was nominally her senior and hadn't been made because he'd been transferred to Shimla on the understanding that he wouldn't want so on and so forth. But she dealt with it tactfully and well. Living in Shimla, this is where I disturbed the balance tenor of her lifetime. Living in Shimla on my own as Chief Justice, I found that the household revolved around my needs. The staff at home was there to look after me and to ensure that I was comfortable. This was a new experience. In the morning, the newspapers were at my sole disposal. There used to be a scrabble for newspapers in the house. The bathroom available at my convenience. Breakfast served at a time of my choosing, and the car ready at my command. Radha used to have a huge appetite for the car, so Mama and Papa hardly got a look in. In the evening, the fire would be lit and the room heated and cheery for my return. In my earlier homes, my needs had always been considered last. The man of the house, whatever his job, was treated in a special manner. Everything revolved around his needs, and it was accepted that he would never be disturbed when he was working. On the other hand, I, as a working woman, was treated differently. The servants thought nothing of coming and disturbing me for every domestic inquiry and problem. The children felt they could walk into my office at home and complain about some triviality, even if I was in the middle of writing a judgment. At Shimla, for the first time, I felt like a person in my own right. And this attitude of the staff somehow also rubbed off on my family when they came to visit. But this state of affairs did not last long. Vikram arrived with his books and papers. He was completing his final revision of a suitable board. He took over the whole of the glazed veranda room on the first floor and all the table space he could find. I kept a small bridge table covered with law books to prevent its being taken over completely. When I wanted to work, I removed them and quickly put them back when I had finished. One day when I came home from court a little earlier than usual, maybe the list finished at the time, Vikram objected. I said to him, I thought it was my house. He replied, when you come home, my characters run away. So that was that. I quietly sneaked. I was being put in my place once again by my demanding children. Now, before I get to slightly more serious matters, I think I should talk about the mouse. If you feel you'd like to hear about the mouse.
Yes.
Actually, maybe not. Yeah. So, one of the things Mama was most known for later was a letter that she wrote. She was very unwilling to speak out about judgments and so on. But a very good judgment by Justices Shah and Muralidhar. Gautam and I have been in some correspondence from 2006 while this case ricocheted up and down about the decriminalization of homosexuality. Was overturned by two judges of the Supreme Court. Single, I think, and Mukhopadhyay. I remember Mukhopadhyay saying something. Single. Karnal. What is Karnal? I thought it's a city in Nepal. Anyway, the letter she wrote was quite measured. And at one point, this letter begins the judgment on this subject of one of the judges of the 5-person bench, our present Chief Justice, Dhananjay Chandrachud. This is what she wrote. From denial to freedom. And then he starts with this quotation. What makes life meaningful is love. The right that makes us human is the right to love. To criminalize the expression of that right is profoundly cruel and inhumane. To acquiesce in such criminalization, or worse, to recriminalize it, is to display the very opposite of compassion. And now this sentence, I think, has weight because in the light of judicial courage or the opposite. To show exaggerated deference to a majoritarian parliament when the matter is one of fundamental rights is to display judicial pusillanimity. Cowards. For there is no doubt that in the constitutional scheme, it is the judiciary that is the ultimate interpreter. Now you could say that in this case, one of her children was involved, me. But in every case where it involved fundamental freedoms and cruelty, and so she felt, well, when the Babri Masjid was torn down, my mother was among the signatories of the front page advertisement in our main newspaper. It was deliberately decided, owing to its content, that the signatories should only be Hindus. You will see why. It read as follows. If you are a Hindu, read on. And there were only, I think, we deliberately reduced the number of signatories to 20. Where is it? Sorry, I want you to be able to find it. It should be easy to find because it's a black margin thing, so why is it not here? Here we go. Nor was the fact that the structure represented our ancient heritage, our mixed ancient heritage, considered. It was truly tragic, and it divided people in a manner that was harrowing. Yet most people were reluctant to speak up and condemn this barbarous act that had been committed in the presence of senior leaders of various fundamental Hindu groups. There were, however, some concerned citizens who immediately swung into action. Professor Dharma Kumar, an economist of repute and a good friend, rang up and said she could not sleep at night, just thinking of the trauma the Muslim community must be going through. She asked me whether I would sign a statement about it, and they had to pay. Dharma also added that I would have to contribute 1,000 rupees towards an insertion of the statement to the Times of India. So later she rang up Vikram and said that he had been advised that the advertisement would be more effective on the front page with just about 20 so, were Vikram and I willing to stand up and be counted and to face the repercussions, if any, she wondered. We agreed to go writing. Now, here are the names: Bharatram, Goenka, Lalthapa, industrials, then, and so on and so forth. There were various Secretary Generals, Secretaries of the Government of India, Ved Maharaj, Air Chief Marshal, S.K. Mehra, General K. Sundarji, so Naval, Army, whatever, everything. If you are a Hindu, read on. Do you believe that the demolition of the Babri Masjid restored Hindu pride, enhanced national honor, strengthened India? If so, consider the possibility that the act debased Hindu culture, shamed the nation across the world, increased the tensions between all communities, and so weakened India. She felt that such a thing was not only an inhumane act, a cruel act, but it was unpatriotic. It fractured and so weakened. It was un-Indian because it didn't recognize that we are of a mixed heritage. Even Hinduism came from outside. And I would go so far as to say that, yes, she even said at one point, unpatriotic, un-Indian, and un-Hindu. So I said, Mama, what do you mean by that? She said, well, we've always said, remember Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. It is, and she said, yeah, so lesser people always say this is mine, that is yours, but the generous or higher people say the world is a family. Indeed, Eva, it is indeed a family. And the generosity in the best part of the world is what she spoke to. Now, when Mariam Faruqi, iProbono's managing director and a very close friend, asked us if iProbono could establish a fellowship for a new generation of social justice lawyers, inspired by my mother's legacy and achievements. My father Premo, my brother Shantam, my sister Radha and I agreed. We knew our mother would have been proud to be at the helm of a project. Long road ahead. In fact, given demographic trends, you'll probably live to be 110. So use your time well and be fearless.
Thank you, Vikram. And particularly poignant because I read On Balance when it was first published, and it was the text that really inspired me to do something more than the mainstream legal career. And just as Leela said, I think is certainly an inspiration to many of us. So it's such an honor, and thank you for endorsing it, Shantam, Aradhana, and Vikram, so generously in giving your time. I had a little tranquilizer gun that I had to put back in my holster, not to stop the Vikram, because actually something that is very important to us going forward is storytelling, and Vikram's a storyteller. And as lawyers, we always want to get our points across and be quite dry. But this, I think what Vikram has shown us today in practice, that storytelling, listening to Justice Leela Seth's story is very important. It will show us and tell us that at each stage of our journey, the difference that we can make. So thank you, Vikram, for doing that. It's very, very kind of you. And now I want to move on to our three panelists. We're very lucky to be joined by Gautam Ban, the Associate Dean of the School of Human Development and Senior Lead in Academics and Research at the Indian Institute of Human Settlements. Really a leading light in housing rights, working on urban poverty, inequality, social protection, and housing. We have Dia Kapoor, iProbono's supervisory advocate, practicing in the High Court and the Supreme Court. She's worked on iProbono's child sexual abuse cases, housing and minority rights cases, and she's been with us for a very long time. And we have Adit Pujari, another iProbono supervisory advocate, practicing criminal law, and he's supported in many of our POCSO cases. So, over to you guys. I wanted to first ask Dia, since you've been supervisory advocate with iProbono for a number of years, the evolution of iProbono, you've seen it, you've seen how we've grown. What are your impressions, good and bad, please? Critical. And where do you see the organization going? And what case do you think was particularly instrumental for you?
Yeah, I'm gonna do this with a little bit of storytelling. So the reason I became a lawyer was actually as a young girl, my father took me to High Court and I sat in Justice Leela Seth's court. And that's what made me become a lawyer. So after I graduated, it was, you want to be a lawyer like Justice Leela Seth, but what do you get? You just get, every regular case to do. So in fact, strangely, I was a young lawyer in the Supreme Court when Justice Lokur called a whole bunch of Supreme Court lawyers and said, you guys go to the Juvenile Justice Board. Don't be there. I don't know if you remember this. So we all went, trooped off to the Juvenile Justice Board and sat there. And we didn't know what to do because there were Juvenile Justice Board lawyers who ruled the roost there. And here we were, all of us having arrived from the Supreme Court, wanting to do good, but not knowing how. So we actually sat there for many days. And in fact, I don't know whether you remember, sir, but you said, get a table and sit there, just be there, and you'll become part of the system. We tried that, but it didn't work. Or I gave up, I failed, I went back, did everything else in the High Court and Supreme Court. And then years later came iProbono. And Swati put me on the panel and said, there is a child sexual abuse case to be done. And that's where iProbono made the difference, because I didn't have the capacity to go and sit, to speak to the child victim, to know what the problem was. But iProbono had created an ecosystem which made it easy for lawyers like us to do this work. They worked with the child rights organizations. It was a case with HUC. And HUC was in touch with the victims' parents. iProbono created a brief, did the research, spoke to the victims, gave it to the lawyer went to court. And in that process, the victim felt protected. There was a protection that the victim felt with the child rights organization, with the iProbono organization. The lawyer didn't have to chase the client didn't have to chase the lawyer. It created an ecosystem which made it easy for lawyers like us to do the good that we wanted to do. And it started with, child sexual abuse cases. We went into victims' compensation, into housing rights, into, we did the 103rd Constitutional Amendment before the Supreme Court. So iProbono has over the years expanded their ambit. And I mean, with a phenomenal team of people, Diksha, Priya, Vinita. I mean, we've just done, Nimisha and us are now working on trying to influence how you can actually have, guidelines for protection of child victims. So there's a whole ecosystem that iProbono has created around many cases. I mean, we just did another housing rights case where, Gautam was like, okay, things are not working in the court. We've got to do it differently. Let's go to the government. Let's make a representation there. All the lawyers working on various housing rights came together. iProbono put all of this together. And it's worked. We finally got the orders we wanted. Hopefully the Judy dwellers are going to get their homes. So it's been a great journey of just bringing people together who want to do good and enabling it. So congratulations, iProbono.
That's really super kind. And I'd like to say Dia has called out a number of people, and it really is the people. There are great hearts and minds in our team, and obviously in our community of lawyers. And I have to say, I think my greatest sense of pride is that I've been able to meet and work with our team. You should really get to know that each one is remarkable, and as we grow, I think we attract more and more of these wonderful people. So, moving on to other, you have worked on our POXO cases. Can you tell us a little bit about that and the case that really has meant the most to you?
First, you have to tell us what POXO is. It's another one, please.
Good. So, yeah, it's the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. So that's POXO. Let me talk about something very recent. So I was appearing for an accused in a POXO case. The gentleman is said to have raped his daughter, who was 4 years old, and the Delhi High Court has a very interesting guideline. Not many other high courts have that, which is when you are granting bail to an accused in these kinds of cases, you have to give notice to the victim, which basically means that the victim has to be heard when bail is being granted. So it was a very strange situation in court where we were standing for the accused. And the victim was present in court, and this was after she had deposed in the trial court. This was at the appellate stage, and she was waiting around in court. And I told the judge, look, case aside and all of that, I represent the accused, but the victim standing right here, I think it's just inappropriate to have the victim present there. She's already been through a whole traumatic experience. There's the deposition, as Justice Luku talked about, which is quite inhumane. You have a 164 statement, which is made before all of that. So the judge, I just told the judge, and this was a fantastic judge in the Delhi High Court, not on the criminal bar, but on the criminal side as a judge, he's fantastic. So when he told the judge that, look, this is happening, the judge said, well, can you give a note on how we can avoid this situation from happening again? So I called up my two hotlines on this. I called up Priya and I called up Diksha, and I said, hey, can we get something out of this? And this was at 1:15, which is when the High Court rises. I had a note in my inbox at 1:45. A note from, Priya sent that in, and then I think, was Nimisha working on that? Everyone from Team iProbono worked on that. So that's the kind of database that we can expect from the team at iProbono. So it was phenomenal, because at 2:15 when we gave that to a judge, the judge said, look here, let me get the DLSA and the DHC LSC together, which is the Delhi Legal Services Authority and the Delhi High Court Legal Services Committee together. And ma'am was also there in the hearing. At which point, those three sets of notes, one from the DHC LSC, one from iProbono, and one from DLSA, got together and got us a fairly good set of guidelines which would help in preventing this victim from coming to court and having to stay there and stand all day and listen to all of that. So that's one part of how iProbono helped us in the recent past. The sheer amount of, research and notes all put together in just about 15 minutes was phenomenal. That's one. The second is one where we started off in 2014. So Swati brought a case to us which wasn't strictly in respect of POXO, but there was a journalist who had said something which would be termed seditious, maybe. She'd be in jail under the UAP, the Unlawful Activities Protection.
I'm grateful. And I'm sure there may be some lay people in the audience who are also.
And so she received threats because she posted something about the then Lord Voldemort. And
this one we can't.
So she'd said something about Lord Voldemort and Mota Bhai on certain things. And some, public thinking, public spirited person had threatened her online, saying, look, I'll come to your house and burn you down or something. And rightfully so, she went to the police. The police registered an FIR. The FIR resulted in what is called charge sheet. And somehow this judge looked at it and said, wait, how is this lady saying all of this about Lord Voldemort? Let us summon her as an accused. At which point, Swati, I think was called iProbono, was reached out to by this lady, and then Swati brought that to us. And it was an interesting case because we were reaching a set of judges in the High Court. We moved a petition in the High Court saying this order should be set aside. And the High Court had a set of judges who just kept saying, how can this journalist say all of this? This man is a respected man. He must face consequences. So we just kept trying to get this matter adjourned. A little snippet, I'm just going to move on a tangent here. As lawyers, a very, very prolific pro bono lawyer, Mr. Kapil Sibal, you believe that he's not pro bono, he does more pro bono cases than most people I know on a day. But anyway, all that aside, Mr. Sibal said that, there are judges who want to come to court and do good. All you have to do is give them the simplest line to do that good. Right? Don't make complicated submissions. Give them your point and show them how they can go back to their husbands or wives and tell them, look, this is what I did for this person. So in this situation, we kept hitting these judges, and finally Justice Mridul came about in the High Court. And we realized that this is a judge who's going to help us. So we tried to pitch it as not writing out a detailed judgment to comment on the behavior of the magistrate. So we just kept sort of pushing Justice Mridul to ask the police that, are you really intending to file a charge sheet in this case? Are you really want to put this woman behind bars? Or, make her face a trial? And eventually the inspector literally just said, no, we're not. We have no intention to do so. And ended in a closure report. No real judgment to speak of. So it was, as you said, it's a battle we chose to lose because we didn't get a judgment. But what we did get is the lady finally was off because the police was delicately sort of pushed to not sign a charge sheet. So I think the point that these two stories had, and iProbono's link with them, is that the system works. It's just that we need to, as lawyers here, we need to just sort of try and ensure that people like Justice Lokur, who have the power to make it work very quickly, are given that ability, and we don't go to court with bluster and all of that. We just tell them to the point things and get our reliefs. So that's my story.
Gautam, me and Gautam I had the pleasure of working with Gautam during COVID times, and I learned a lot from him about economic and social cultural rights in the context of urban poverty. And we worked on COVID relief. So iProbono, next evolution was comprehensive care. In simple terms, that means our clients and others in their communities, like Gautam and others, to get the funds to where it mattered most. And so I had great pleasure working with Gautam for some time in 2020. Gautam, I'd love to hear from you about the role you see lawyers play, both as traditional lawyers, litigating, representation, advocacy, but also as people who have a role as human beings to support their in their community. So over to you.
So I am someone who has always tried to stay far away from the law, and I feel like it has chased me all my life. I was 24 when we filed one of the petitions against Section 377 of the High Court. I was not 24 when we finished with that case. I was 25 when I first wrote to Vikram out of the blue and said, look, there is an open letter we have to sign. Would you lead this so that others would agree to sign it? And I tell that story because one of the reasons we signed that letter was that as queer activists and as queer people in a very different time, we've become quite cool now as queer people, but we were not cool then. We were terrified of court. 377 is a very celebrated judgment today, both in its reversals. It was not so glorious for us because it is an enormous risk to go to the law, because the law has great majesty. And so when the law refuses you, you are silenced. And we were terrified that if we lost in court, and we almost lost in court multiple times before Shah and Muralidhar, that it would end the movement. That we would be told by society, you had your day in court. The court looked at you and said, no, and that we would not survive the loss. I have never forgotten this feeling, because even while associated with a judgment that gave you the highest heights of what law can do. Right? I mean, that the Nas judgment is, to me, not a judgment about gay rights. To me, it was a fundamental articulation of what democracy means. It was an articulation of dignity. I mean, there's a paragraph in Nas that everyone sort of forgot, which was that Nas was the first time that judges read horizontal discrimination under 15. Because we don't have anti-discrimination protection in India. And as queer people, more than 377, what we wanted is anti-discrimination protection. And currently in India, you are protected by discrimination against the state. The state cannot discriminate against you. Your landlord can. Okay? And Nas was one of the first judgments that said 15 applies horizontally. It was an argument made by Taruna Khaitan. And when we were filing it, everyone said, no one in the world will take this argument. No one's going to read 15 horizontally. So when we lost Nas in that interim period, what I mourned for more was the loss of a broad understanding of anti-discrimination as a foundation for dignity and equality. It was not narrowly about 377. But it left in me a sense always that the law's majesty should be treated with caution. Housing rights, and iProbono knows this more than anyone else, is where we have actually no expectation of majesty from the law. So I feel a very far distance from Shah and Muralidhar. We are dragged to court now. We go to the court because we have no option. We go with our backs to the wall and we go to prevent the bulldozer to stop just 24 more hours. There's nothing romantic about our search for justice in the law. I have to say that I find myself struggling to hold on to think of law and justice in the same courtroom. It's in our experience recently on questions of housing rights, this is not the story we read. So the reason why I appreciate iProbono's work so much is two things. One is that they recognize the limits of law. They recognize that what happens in the courtroom is deeply influenced by what happens outside it. And that they are building the kinds of coalitions and the kinds of partnerships that don't treat communities as clients, but as equivalent people who make arguments in law. That they have a set of people that they have realized that the legal battle is a tiny part of the larger struggle. And I think that there is, I'm a great fan of humility. I'm a teacher. And to me, classrooms are not built on genius. I think the greatest confusion people have about big ideas is that geniuses produce them. They don't. Sustained knowledge comes from collective wisdom. And I think that when I see iProbono lawyers and Delhi Housing Rights Task Force groups and volunteer Basti eviction mapping collectives and showing up in court and going to the field and collecting documents and understanding the law, and I can get Karuvaki to sit with me for 20 minutes to explain that a GIS satellite image has a 100-meter error. And in that 100-meter error is the difference between the Basti existing in 2006 and not existing in 2006. When we win in court, only because we were able to explain to a judge to not trust a Google Earth image without asking something called its resolution. These are not things lawyers learn. This is not the language of the law, but it is absolutely the language and life of the court. And so I think we are at a time, in the session before this, we were saying that there is a court ki hawa hoti. There is a feel, a mahal, a sense of the kind of things a court will listen to and not at different times. I think it's also a sense ki wo jo hawa hoti hai, it goes through that lattice screen that a lot of our buildings have. Delhi is very fond of the cement lattice screen. It's good architecture for hot buildings. The lattice screens let light through, but they also let air through. Which means what happens outside the court is shaped by what happens in the larger world that we're in. And I appreciate very deeply about iProbono's housing rights work is that they're not just interested in the case, they're actually interested in housing justice. Which means that the embedding of the case begins before the eviction notice and it stays after. These are lawyers I have seen, and it is very difficult for us as social movements to suddenly have to deal with lawyers. We have to say. We were quite fine on our own until all of you all showed up. And you have strange demands and you speak different language and you speak in tongues and you drag us to places that we don't know how to fight. activists know how to fight a sarkar. We are not good at fighting an adalat. And this has changed politics in this country. It has changed us as housing rights movements. But to me, I think that both the lessons of 377 and of our housing rights litigation is to understand for your next 10 years that to be lawyers, you need to know the law. To seek justice, you need to know much more than the law. And so I congratulate you on how far you've come, but I also hope that as you grow, the meaning of what it means to study law and be a lawyer will keep changing and growing and broadening, and we will return law much closer to justice than it is now.
Gautam could have been a lawyer, right? For sure. He would have moved the court. He could have moved us all to tears just now. So I wanted to say one thing. When Vikram and I first met, he asked me, and I was surprised no one had asked me before, why the name iProbono? And he said, it's interesting. And I said, it's actually very plain, I pro bono, I am for the public good. I didn't want to mystify anything. I just wanted to make it very clear what we stood for. I am for the public good. And anyone who joins signs up to that credo. So now we have question time. And I wanted to hear from people who are for the public good. We have limited time, by the way, because it is 8 o'clock, but you want to stay for a bit longer and speak to our panelists, right? Yes, great. So I want to hear from those of you who are on the beginning of your journey or far advanced into it, about your experiences, and also to address questions to our panelists. Please keep them short. And I also want you to think about what more iProbono can do and what you can do for this community. In particular, spreading the word about the fellowship. The fellowship is something that I think every young lawyer should know about and apply to at some point. Just as Rita said, is probably one of our biggest heroes, unsung, and we need to make sure that everyone remembers her and is inspired by her story. I would hope that On Balance is something you will have in your libraries soon. Secondly, I'd like you to think about how you can shore up iProbono and shore up not just our organization, but other justice organizations, as you know, very much under attack, very much fragile at the moment, and only getting worse. So what can you do? Now, I've got one suggestion. If every lawyer gave 50 rupees a month, we wouldn't have to be reliant on foreign funds, we wouldn't have to be reliant on philanthropists. Can you think about how in your own communities you can start socializing that idea? That lawyers, obviously, we're very grateful, and it's wonderful that lawyers engage in pro bono work, but 50 to 100 rupees every month could keep organizations running without any fear. Right now, a lot of organizations are fearful. So let's think about that as our second challenge. And thirdly, in the next stage of our evolution, rather than always having to be reactionary, which we are, often litigation is righting a wrong, how can we start working in prevention? So something I've spoken to Vikram and Shantam and Radna about length is how we can take texts like Leela said's Constitution for Children and bring it into forums where it would never be heard, and help get it into people's hearts and minds, and the role lawyers have to play in that education piece. So anyway, keep that all in mind when you say what you have to say and when you ask up your questions. Go ahead.
Fantastic panel. The question goes to Gautam. Gautam, if you really look at our urban cities, the top 10 cities, about 70 to 80% of Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, Hyderabad are illegal neighborhoods, just comprising 70 to 80%. And the balance, if you really see the builder community, which breaks all the kind of bylaws in even the best of neighborhoods, they've taken over. So if you look at the next 10 years and housing being an area you specialize on, how do you see prevention? Because I think that's what is being said. Otherwise, we see a very different urban picture emerging. So what's your suggestion?
I mean, short answer is I think there's two kinds of reckoning. We have to deal with the fact that our cities were built outside our intentions. It is not just true that the poor built bastis. The rich also built what we call unauthorized colonies. Right? So there is as much a story of Sainik farms as it is of LNGP colony. If one story is told a little more than others. Too many lawyers. But I think there are two questions for me. I think it pushes our sense of how the law responds to something post facto. How do we change the idea of the law that has to have a negotiated view with a very complex reality? You cannot now, just as we say that you cannot turn to a basti after 20 years and suddenly apply the law on it, you can also not do it to unauthorized colonies. The law will move. The unauthorized colonies became regularized. So I would say that this is a thing that is something that we all grapple with. The question should be, where do you begin? And what should be the non-negotiable approach? So if your approach is to say, you have to find a meaningful way to negotiate with these terrains of legality, your non-negotiable condition should be the dignity of people and their right to shelter in the city. So I think that the way forward is to change our logic from adjudication, decision, demolition, punishment to negotiation, governance, compromise, and retrofit. And I think that's our only option. We do not have the ability to prevent East Delhi. It exists. We have to now negotiate with it. And I think it is not an easy thing for courts to do. And my greatest empathy is for when you are in a place where you have a judge and you can tell the only thing that she wants is this never to have had to come to her in the first place, because she is very tied in what she can do. She is very tied in her remit. So I think that in many ways, the question of how the law deals with a majority violation of law is a very foundational question for law itself. There's no easy answers, but I think our approach has to change. So the questions to me, the words are repair, retrofit, regularize, not build, construct, and regulate. It's come back.
Next question, comment? Is everyone very hungry? Probably. Okay, well, we are, some of us, going to be here, so please approach us individually. I'd love that, I'm sure the others would too. I wanted to just wrap up with thanks. So, as you know, Mariam Faruqi, our managing director, is really the linchpin for iProbono. There is absolutely no way that we'd all be able to function without her. So, thank you, Mariam. And she'll be in Delhi soon. Hopefully, some of you will catch up with her. Diksha Gujral, who is our leading light in India, who is taking forward iProbono into new directions. Diksha and I only met in person yesterday, and I feel like I know her. I've known her for years. Help Diksha make iProbono and make our work expand into new areas, because that's her remit now. And what she's done today, and what she's been doing with our panel of lawyers is really remarkable. And to the whole team, the whole iProbono team are doing such fantastic work. They work long hours. I would hope that you'd all help them, speak well of them, and introduce them as much as possible to people who can help in their mission, their personal missions, and our collective. I wanted to say that our supporters, many of them don't want to be publicly thanked, so I'm not going to thank any of them, but we do have some wonderful partners in India. And without them, it would be absolutely impossible to do what we do, as I talked about. Philanthropists, foundations. But we need to move away from that. So, like I said, let's think about how collectively we can fund organizations working in the justice space, a really, really difficult space, probably the most difficult space to get funded now. I would like to thank Vinitha Modi here, who is on the board of iProbono and takes all sorts of risks all the time. And who has been with me for 10 years and who makes sure we operate smoothly. Thank you, Vinitha, so much. I couldn't do anything without you, I don't think. And I'd like to say to all of you, one of the things that has inspired me is Ambedkar's quote, be educated, be organized, be agitated. This last bit, be agitated. So easy to lose spirit and to be despondent, and I have often felt that, and I'm sure you have too. Justice Lukur, I heard him say something that renewed my feelings of possibility. He was talking about how he worked on a law commission report, how it hadn't gone anywhere, but implementation of justice, and now it's just sitting on a shelf somewhere. But then in the next breath, he talked about the possibilities of the law, and he said, all of this, it's possible. And you could see that this is someone who's impatient and continues to be restless. I thought someone who's had such a long career and probably had so much frustration along the way can continue feeling optimistic, so can I. And I think that's one thing to take away. This tenacity is a really understated quality and so important amongst lawyers, because you'll have clients who will often let you down, you'll have courts who will let you down, and you'll have your fellow lawyers who will let you down. But to keep going, and to keep pursuing this ephemeral justice, I think, is one that we all should aspire to. So I will end with that. I will say, be educated, be organized, and be agitated. Thank you so much.